Twinema.
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 Twinema. Cinema. Twinema.
Cinema. Hello and welcome to Twinema Cinema. And I'm your host, Max. And here with me, as always, my beautiful identical twin brother, Joey.
Ah, beautiful. I wasn't expecting that.
Well, I mean, you're beautiful, I'm beautiful, we're both beautiful.
It just feels so good having someone say that to you out loud besides yourself in the mirror. You know, it's nice hearing it from another perspective.
I know, it's not a mirror, though. You're just looking at me.
And this series is dedicated to exploring movies that just so happen to have the same plot and came into existence around the same time.
Joey, what are we watching today?
Today we are going to be watching Armageddon and Deep Impact.
Ah, yes, the asteroid movies of 1998.
These are also 1998?
Yes, I know we just got through watching two Ant movies from 1998, but apparently we stumbled upon a theme.
This is insane to me because both of these different groups of movies are like a major part of my childhood, which is so strange. Like at least with these two, I have seen them both multiple times, and I owned both of these films growing up. So it's like I have a better understanding of the differences between these two than I did last time around.
Like, I guess, obviously, animated movies are going to be a little more part of my childhood, but one of these movies today is definitely a bigger part of my life than the other, and I'm going to go out on a limb and say it's the exact same way for you, that Armageddon is the one we remember the most.
Definitely. And I think that's definitely has nothing to do with the fact that Aerosmith did like the entire soundtrack.
Yes, this is true, and
like,
we thank them for their service.
Aerosmith was part of my childhood before this film, and then friggin' they got their first number one hit off of this soundtrack with I Don't Want to Miss a Thing, which I heard that entire summer and have danced to at every single school dance from that point on. It'll probably be playing at my wedding someday. Like, I love Aerosmith.
Because you're going to recreate the end of Armageddon at your wedding, which was a wedding in the movie.
That would be something else, but it would also just be a little too tragic for my liking.
So you're just going to have, pictures of Owen Wilson and Michael Clark Duncan and Bruce Willis in chairs at the back of the ceremony.
I don't want to cry. I don't want to cry.
You'll just see them just start crying. The lucky lady that you end up marrying will just be wondering what the hell's going on.
Oh, man. Liv Tyler. God. But, yes, for me, it's also Armageddon. I have seen this movie so many times, and it's a masterpiece. I have argued on behalf of this movie in so many different nerd fights that I've been in regarding Michael Bay and just disaster movies in general. This thing, it's something else. And I love it. It stands because of its incredibly well done archetypal characters that have no depth. But there are so many of them, and it just works. It just works for me. It's so hard for me to tear this movie apart and figure out why it works. It just does.
And it's always crazy because, much like a horror movie, all these characters, they're fun, but they don't go much beyond that. So when they start dying off, you feel they're fully formed at that point.
Yeah, it's like you have a hint of sadness, and you are not happy that they're gone, but it's also not like you are so invested that you can't move past it. With the exception of a couple characters, which is also really hit home in the last part of this film with all of the imagery and all of the music. It culminates in quite a tragic end, although maybe it didn't even deserve to get there in many ways.
Who can say? And it's always fun with this one because I remember Deep Impact trying to take the high road as far as entertainment is concerned, whereas Armageddon just blows up the road.
That's a pretty good way to describe it.
Whereas the characters in Deep Impact, they actually try to give them fully formed arcs, which just seems like a weird scenario to put through Armageddon.
Yeah, like in Deep Impact, one of the big differences between the two films is that all of the main characters in Deep Impact seem to heavily think about the impact of what's about to happen. How it affects everyone around them, how it affects the world.
And I assume that impact hits deeply.
Yes, It does.
It's like, if you would be so kind, would you indulge me with what the plot for that movie was?
All right. Deep Impact is centered around, basically, the main character is Elijah Wood.
Yes, Elijah Wood is the kid who discovers the asteroids?
Yes.
Asteroids, plural?
Yeah. So, Elijah Wood discovered... Wait, isn't it just one asteroid?
No, I think there's two.
I'm pretty sure, like, maybe it breaks into two, or maybe it is two. Well, regardless, he is one of the first people to notice this when he's out with his a lady and his classmates, and they're looking into the sky, and they're like, what is that? And so he eventually becomes like a hero in this world because he's the first person, one of the first people to discover it. And so then we later go on to find ourselves following a journalist around who believes that there is some kind of massive scandal going on in the U.S. government involving, I can't remember the acronym, but they believe it's like a...
I think it was L or Eve, one of those.
Yeah, it's like a...
I want to say L just because I think it was extinction level event.
Yeah, I think that's right, extinction level event. And so they believe that this senator, I think it's a senator, is like cheating on his wife, and
or
that's
the president.
I don't think it was the president.
Because the president wouldn't cheat on his wife.
Yeah. And correct. The president is a moral, upstanding citizen of the country. But they find out later that he retired not because of a cheating scandal, but in fact because he wanted to spend more time with his wife, since this was coming, since an asteroid was coming to destroy the world. And once that news gets out, the world kind of goes into a whole tailspin, and they're trying to figure out ways to save the planet. And one of them that they come up with, which is the almost exact same plan as in Armageddon, is that we're going to send people to the asteroid to drill a hole into it and then plant a nuclear device in the middle to blow it up so that it will then not destroy Earth.
Which is a noble effort, to be sure, and it's always fun. Exact same plot, pretty much, as Armageddon. Asteroid the size of Delaware. Wait, no, that's not right. Sorry, asteroid the size of Texas.
Yeah, it was Texas.
It was Texas, definitely. Because there was some definitely McDonald's-sized tie-ins there involving burgers the size of Texas. But, yeah, asteroid shows up. They gotta blow it up. Billy Bob Thornton recruits Bruce Willis and a bunch of oil drillers, because that makes sense, to go up into space and blow up the asteroid. And obviously shenanigans ensue, because these guys are not nearly as qualified. And at one point, I remember the commentary, someone tries talking to, I don't know, it was Ben Affleck trying to talk to Michael Bay about why on Earth they would send oil drillers to an asteroid instead of astronauts. And Michael Bay just told him to shut the fuck up.
Exactly. Ben Affleck asked him, wouldn't it be easier to teach astronauts to drill oil than it would be to teach oil drillers to be astronauts? And it's just like, apparently that's not the movie we're making, so let's not get into it.
And that's why Michael Bay has more Oscars than Ben Affleck. But I'm excited to actually go back into Deep Impact because it's one I don't remember as well, and it actually tries, which is a unique thing for this movie.
Well, one thing that's crazy about Deep Impact that separates it from Armageddon is they don't initially succeed in the same level. Like, obviously there's going to be errors that happen along the way to make it more dramatic, but I think what ends up happening, I don't think it's two asteroids. I think what happens is they accidentally blow off a piece of the asteroid, and then that ends up hitting Earth. So in Deep Impact, there is actually a large meteorite that crashes to Earth that causes serious chaos, and a very dramatic, very sad sequence on the beach, I gotta say.
Yeah, it's a good one, but I think you're wrong, but you know what? We're gonna find out who's right as we do watch both Armageddon and Deep Impact, and we're going to watch those and get right back to you folks.
Yeah, so we'll see you in about 4.5 hours.
4.5 hours, yeah. Bye.
Little Richard, me and you, man, we going to the top, baby. Big time. Somebody dial 911.
A few minutes ago, the United States ambassadors to every country in the world told the leaders of those nations what I'm about to tell you.
It's what we call a global killer, the end of mankind.
How big?
It's the size of Texas, Mr. President.
If it can't be stopped, all life on Earth will perish.
Basically the worst parts of the Bible.
Now, we've been planning for the worst.
How? We're bringing the world's best deep core driller.
This is the crew that will stop the comets.
The United States government just asked us to save the world. Anybody want to say no?
To ensure our way of life goes on, a network of immense caves has been constructed. It is our new Noah's Ark.
You're warriors up there. You're already heroes. Just sit back and enjoy the ride.
If you marry me, I can get you into the Ark.
I'm marrying you.
Bet you are.
Let's start praying about it right now.
We will prevail. Life will go on.
Tell me you've never let anybody down before.
Never quit yet. We all gotta die, right? I'm the guy who gets to do it saving the world.
Listen, this is a kick-ass ride.
Good luck to us all.
And we're back.
A dinosaur story.
Quite appropriate segue too, considering what killed the dinosaurs.
The most likely answer being a giant asteroid.
I mean, Charlton Heston told us about it in the beginning of Armageddon.
That's a good point. We, for this week, watched Armageddon together as our first film.
I know, it's one of our favorite movies to begin with, so we decided, hey, let's watch it, and why not make it super special by watching the Criterion DVD edition that we picked up from Amoeba Music in downtown Hollywood.
Which has some problems, as we discovered. There are deleted scenes from the movie that have been added into the Criterion Collection version. And those scenes do not add anything to this movie, and as a matter of fact, ruined part of it for me.
And they're just visually jarring as well, because they're not color corrected to the final product of the movie, so I don't know what Criterion was thinking, honestly, in the 90s when they added this, other than the fact that the only reason it exists on Criterion to begin with is because Michael Bay went to Wesleyan, and so did the creators of Criterion.
Well, I didn't know that, but that's a pretty good reason, you know? You gotta hang out with your homies. But I gotta just say that seeing Bruce Willis's dad was like, why? I'm so glad they cut that from the theatrical run.
And then the other one was just Owen Wilson little tidbits, like him praying to God and stuff like that, that, you know what? He's not going to make it through the movie. We don't need it.
We didn't need any more of either of those guys, to be honest.
And he wasn't a big thing at the time either, so, yeah, it just, it didn't need to happen, but lucky you, more than likely, you're not going to watch the Criterion version of this movie, so it's not even an issue.
So anyhow, Armageddon starts off real fast.
So fast, they only have 18 days before the asteroid actually hits Earth, which is considerably shorter than the almost 2 years they have in Deep Impact before that comet hits Earth.
It's pretty nuts. The differences between these two films are pretty extreme, and they're kind of exactly what you would expect, honestly, when you're thinking of Michael Bay, is that Armageddon is just in your face the entire time. It's a truncated timeline. Their ticking clock is, as Max said, only 18 days. So the whole film, which involves the end of the world, takes place in less than a month.
So certain realities are suspended for this movie, and there's not a quiet moment in it, versus Deep Impact, which is realistic to the point of tedium sometimes, actually features, you know, normal human activity that would occur when you hear about a comet about to, you know, hit Earth and ruin all life as we know it.
Deep Impact has a number of scenes that are just human connection moments that are just these really well written, really well acted, simple moments. And there is almost none of that in Armageddon. There are some. They do try to sprinkle those in a little bit with like Ben Affleck and Liv Tyler. But that's really about it. And even those are shot in the style of Michael Bay. So they are extreme. They are constantly moving. And it is just, there is no subtlety in Armageddon. Armageddon is the end of the world is happening. It's happening right now. Here's how it sounds. Here's what it's going to look like. Here's some Aerosmith.
In which case, if it isn't Aerosmith, the end of the world definitely sounds like... That was an asteroid, if you didn't know.
Actually, I think that's probably going to sound a lot better on playback than I thought.
And then, there's a huge buildup. I don't know if it's necessarily of tension, but it's buildup of feelings in Deep Impact, because the impact is deep. But yeah, Deep Impact, you get Elijah Wood discovering the comet that's going to wipe out humanity 2 years before the fact. But the twist is, the guy who helps him, the astronomer, crashes, and it takes another 8 months or so, or something like that, for them to actually find his info and figure out, oh no, we're doomed.
It's also interesting that you said that, Max, that Deep Impact has this build-up and creates a deep impact. Because that joke actually makes more sense with Armageddon. Because all of Armageddon is building up to one specific moment. It never deviates from this hero's journey path, and it just builds to it the entire time. Whereas Deep Impact is structurally very different from Armageddon, having a much more heightened first and second act than Armageddon, which is strange considering how fast Armageddon comes at you. In Deep Impact, we have a failure to destroy the asteroid at about the halfway mark, whereas in Armageddon, the entire mission to destroy this asteroid is consecutive and runs together. There is no delay.
There is a minor failure at about the Act 3 break when, one of the armadillos, the drilling machines in the movies that totally weren't made to sell toys, blows up, goes sky high, and the only one who can save them is Ben Affleck in a second armadillo drill vehicle.
Did we forget to mention that both of these movies are about space missions where we send people to fly out to asteroids, to drill holes into these asteroids, put nuclear bombs in these asteroids, and blow up these asteroids or blow them off course?
Now, you would assume that people going on these missions would be qualified, wouldn't you?
You'd think that. I don't know what I was going to call you right there. I was like, you'd think that, James. I'm like, he's not James. Max. You'd think that, Max. And in one of these films, they are, in fact, qualified. If you can guess what that is, I will give you a hug sometime.
He'll probably give you a hug anyway. But the answer is Deep Impact. Because they have such a long time, and presumably a little more gravitas, you get the best of the best international astronauts going up into space to save the world. Whereas Armageddon, forget the astronauts that are training to go to Mars. We're going to use these oil drillers to go up instead, because that makes all the goddamn sense in the world.
Well, what's ridiculous to me is, there are many ridiculous things, but one of them that just stands out as like a perfect coincidence that nobody believes is that NASA has built these drilling machines to drill holes into Mars's surface.
And they stole the patent from Bruce Willis to begin with.
And they have these available for this exact mission at this exact time that they had just completed these prototypes. It's
a lot of coincidences to line up for this movie to work. Whereas with the time before the comet will hit in Deep Impact, you have a little more believability that they can develop this technology.
Exactly. Everything in Deep Impact seems just more realistic to how things would actually happen. Granted, neither film is perfect in this. As Max pointed out, they do skip around with science, and they kind of pick and choose the areas where they want to focus, as you kind of do with any movie, but you can't really tell in either of these where they're focused on that. It does go back and forth literally whenever the script needs it to.
Although, one of the main things that was interesting we found with these movies was kind of the contrast between the heroes of the story. As I mentioned, the heroes of Deep Impact are professionals, they're astronauts, they're qualified. Whereas the people we send up into space for Armageddon are your everymans, the people that don't necessarily trust the government to do the work for them.
Yeah, both of these films have very different perspectives on the government, which, speaking of, both of them are incredibly American-centric. The United States government is in charge of both of these world-saving missions, and they are slightly involved with the Russian government in at least in Armageddon, surprisingly, it's in Armageddon that there is more of an international connection, where it's not just American scientists and astronauts, but in Deep Impact, it's mainly the United States and Russia working together, which I thought was fascinating. And also, since it is the mid-90s, it's one of these things that it's still recent that we were enemies for like the last 50 years.
Yeah, it's only within the last decade that we became, quote-unquote friends with the Russians. So I think a popular thing in the 90s was definitely to kiss and make up, as it were.
But back to the United States government issue. If you're looking at these, Deep Impact and Armageddon are on exact opposites. For Deep Impact, we're coming from the perspective of the government for a good portion of this. How they are in charge, they have things handled, they have prepared for this, they have contingencies.
They have tunnels, which are dug in Missouri, and presumably they've talked to other governments around the world. And time to prepare these missions.
Whereas in Armageddon, it is outsiders who come in to save the day. They have to reach out to these people who are independent of the government to come in and fix the government's problems. Speaking of which, this just is something that it took me 20 years to realize this. I had no idea when I was a kid. Did you know that Harry Stamper is part of the 1%? That Bruce Willis, his character, isn't actually an everyman? He owns an oil rig in the South China Sea.
One of many.
He's a freaking millionaire. He is the opposite of an everyman. He is like a fraud, but at the same time, he is an everyman. It's so weird, and it only is exemplified even more in the scene where we see his father, because his father is also an oil man, and he lives in a fucking mansion.
But thankfully, the public doesn't have to go through that particular scene like we did.
This is true. Like that
So
they don't have to deal with that.
So the rich have to come to save us for the most part in Armageddon, whereas qualified folks come to save us in Deep Impact, particularly Robert Duvall, who's just the most curmudgeonly astronaut who's ever curmudgeoned.
Robert Duvall is a god. He is one of the best actors ever.
And they named his character Spurgeon.
And they call him Fish because they called him Sturgeon. And it's just an amazingly stupid joke that I love so much for his backstory.
So yeah, they name him stupid, but he still pulls it off because he's that good.
We've kind of reminisced about these, but I've actually blurred everything together because we're a lot more familiar with these movies, I think, than either of us were with A Bug's Life or Ants.
Yeah, weirdly enough, in the time we were both kids, we weren't watching kids' movies, we were watching shit like this. In particular, I remember my dad taking me to Armageddon in the theater when I was out sick from school with an ear infection, so probably not the best parenting in retrospect, but still, I appreciated the hell out of it.
And I myself, Armageddon is a movie that I have seen over 20 times, and I actually watched Deep Impact more as a kid because I owned a copy of it. And it's so strange because what happened was every time I saw Armageddon, it had more of an impact on me. I think also Armageddon just was on TV more as well. And then as I got into college, more people I know liked Armageddon. And so it just kind of built on it. But there was a point in time where I had the VHS of Deep Impact, and I watched that a lot that summer.
And you had the action figures from Deep Impact, didn't you?
I totally don't think they did have any of those.
That was a test, and you passed. There were none because they didn't have the staying power of the Disney machine, although this was released under the Touchstone label. But it's curious to know about this movie. Again, it's a face-off between DreamWorks and Disney in 1998, except this time DreamWorks with Deep Impact started production first, and Disney hopped on that train to compete directly with them about 2 months later.
I guess from what I was reading, Deep Impact was originally going to be a Steven Spielberg directed production that was based off of a story that he had optioned. What was the name of that story?
I don't remember the story. It was originally supposed to be a remake of the classic sci-fi movie When Worlds Collide. And yeah, Spielberg was going to direct it, but then he kind of passed it off to Mimi Leiter, who recently had directed the first DreamWorks live-action movie, which was The Peacemaker. And with Deep Impact, this was easily one of the most high-profile highest budgeted films ever directed by a woman, which was exciting for the time.
And unfortunately, I believe there was a pretty long gap before that same kind of level of budget was given to a female director again, which is just disappointing. But luckily, we're in a new stage now where that is just hopefully going to no longer be a trend.
It's curious, because I think the person with the highest budget before that and after was Catherine Bigelow. Like, I think Point Break had a higher budget at one point, and then K-19 The Widowmaker had the first $100 million budget.
She directed K-19 The Widowmaker?
Yes, she did.
Have you seen K-19 The Widowmaker?
Not 1 minute.
I haven't either. Wait, do you think that's a dueling movie? Did that come out like the same year that like U-571 came out?
Did not. It was 2 years difference. U-571 was 2000, and K-19 was in 2002.
Well, never mind then. We'll cut this segment out of this one.
I know. Sub-movies kind of fell off the radar, and
God,
I love
U-571 is so good.
Not like Red October good, but still damn solid. I think it's a better World War II movie than it is a sub-movie, if that makes any sense.
Yes.
Mostly because they're just talking about the Enigma code machine, and that thing is cool as hell.
All right, we're off topic. Down Periscope's amazing.
What about McHale's Navy? Not a sub-movie.
Das Boot! All right, sub-movies were a trend that maybe we'll explore another time.
But moving on to box office, which one of these would you say made more money?
If I was gonna guess, I was gonna guess Armageddon, but I never actually knew how much money Deep Impact made. I just know that it had a deep impact on my childhood.
Well, Deep Impact worldwide made just under $350 million.
That's pretty good.
Whereas worldwide Armageddon made just over $550 million.
So that's better.
Yes,
That's better.
It made a lot more money, and I think the Disney machine certainly helped in that regard to a fledgling studio like DreamWorks.
Well, I think that's definitely a big factor is the marketing of it. And also, you can't discount the fact that Michael Bay was coming in hot, right? He came off of
The Rock and Bad Boys was previous to.
The Rock and Bad Boys, and you have Bruce Willis, who's still, one of the biggest stars in the world at the time, and Ben Affleck is, I think their cast definitely had more of
the right stuff. Were you gonna say the right stuff?
Yes, we're gonna go with the right stuff for this movie to be successful, and you can't discount. Especially in the 90s, apparently, how great a soundtrack is, right? Like, Titanic made an unbelievable amount of money, and it had a #1 hit song as a part of that. And here you come again in with Armageddon, with Aerosmith's I Don't Want to Miss a Thing, which was their first #1 hit, and I love that song. I don't think I ever went to a single school dance where that song was not played, slow dancing to it.
Well, you didn't dance to the score to Deep Impact at your dances?
No.
No one did, because it didn't have that memorable score from the late, great James Horner, and it didn't have a memorable song tied to its soundtrack, so obviously it was destined not to do well. Although, where it did do well was critically.
Tell me about what the critics thought about these two films, Max. Because in hindsight, no one ever talks about Deep Impact. People talk about Armageddon all the time. They don't necessarily talk about it in a good light, that's for sure. But no one ever references Deep Impact unless it is in reference to the fact that Armageddon and Deep Impact came out at about the same time. So in their original run, which film was better reviewed? Which one did critics like more?
Well, apparently it was more of a squeaker than I had originally thought. Deep Impact was taken a little more seriously, had 45% critically on Rotten Tomatoes, whereas Armageddon has 38%. So we're within 10% here, which is impressive as far as the two vastly different styles and feels of these movies.
Well, and look at those audience scores, Max. Like, that is crazy. Armageddon coming in with a 73% audience score.
Whereas Deep Impact kind of matches its critical score with 43%, which honestly makes sense as we come to the end of this particular episode, because 43% makes sense for Deep Impact, as it's not a lot of fun. It's a very realistic look at the end of the world, whereas Armageddon, hell of a lot of fun. It's dumb as hell, but I love it.
It's so rewatchable, and it's got these iconic, memorable moments. And it's just pure energy. the whole time it's just going and it's building and it just never stops. It's unrelenting and it's ridiculous. It's almost too exhausting, but since it is just a 2-hour movie, it's not like 2.5 hours long. It kind of clocks in at the exact amount of time you can tolerate that.
Which is weird because Michael Bay definitely unlearned restraint as his career went on.
Which is, I really do believe it's because he quit working with Jerry Bruckheimer. I think that as soon as they quit working together, Michael Bay dropped off the map for a little bit, and then he re-met up with Spielberg and made the Transformers movies and made an unbelievable amount of money. Doesn't matter. I don't want to go any further into that.
So I think we both agree that Armageddon is the better, more enjoyable movie here. But what do you think, what was the best part of each movie? What'd they do right?
What Armageddon did incredibly well is build an ensemble cast that you could follow through the entire movie. They are distinct enough characters, although some of them are definitely stereotypes and some of them are very one-dimensional.
And probably a little offensive.
Yeah, a little bit. But the thing is, all of the characters are individualized enough that you can recognize them and they are separate, distinct characters. And that is just something that you can't really accomplish too often when we're talking about 10 people.
Yeah, Steve Buscemi in particular as Rockhound is easily my favorite character in the movie, and there's no one that has that type of energy in Deep Impact.
There is no comedy in Deep Impact. Like, nothing is funny.
Like, literally the best line in the movie is when all the astronauts, in a last-ditch attempt to save the world, drive their spaceship with the last warheads into the comet, and one of the astronauts says, well, at least we're all going to get high schools named after us.
And it's a joke that's played serious, because it is serious. It is real. It's a line that's essentially based off of the Challenger explosion, because several of the astronauts in that explosion did have high schools named after them. So it was, like, all too real.
Which, honestly, for me, is kind of a plus of Deep Impact when it comes down to it, because it took itself seriously enough to make us look at the realistic parts of a world-ending scenario. You don't see the riots in Armageddon that would come with the end of the world, so it was very sobering to see that type of realism, even though it was kind of a buzzkill.
In Deep Impact, I think one of the things that I really liked as well is there's a couple of scenes that really show great scale. One of them is there's a traffic jam, and that traffic jam is shot practically. It is literally over 1,000 cars that are used in that scene. There's nothing fake about it. Although there's a lot of fake elements in both of these films, because we can't really use actual asteroids, they did do practical things in certain situations that add a lot of weight to the whole movie.
Which is kind of a plus of Armageddon, because honestly, the best stuff is some of the model work and sets they have. The production design and cinematography is fantastic.
I think where Deep Impact is really stronger is acting. There are just these very subtle, simple, quiet moments where there's great performances and there's real high-tension drama throughout all of it. There are so many moments where it's like a break moment. There are so many moments where you want to cry. There are so many moments where you think all is lost and where it's just real. Morgan Freeman brings so much weight to his role as the president, and you believe it. This is the president telling the world that the world may come to an end. You don't have too many moments like that in Armageddon. It's taken way too lightly. But because it's taken so lightly, you can just go on this thrill ride. It's a much easier movie to watch at any random time, to pick up on TV and just jump into it. Deep Impact, it's like, you're in for a world of hurt. Like, it is emotionally brutal. Whereas in Armageddon, there's essentially only one scene that really gets that out of you. And I'll be honest, it gets me. I've cried many a times at that moment. I think
Liv Tyler sells the moments you're talking about.
Oh yes, absolutely. Without Liv Tyler kind of just nailing this moment, I don't think it comes through. But I mean, the Michael Bay's style fits an end of the world movie all too well. That's for sure. Especially once they actually get on the asteroid, where he fails hardcore, in my opinion, is every single shot in Houston. Like, everything in the friggin' NASA control room is absurd. It's just absolutely absurd. I don't understand how many camera movements you can possibly have of one person talking on a microphone and yelling at people. It is insane. It's like he just didn't realize that Billy Bob Thornton's gonna stand there. He's gonna do nothing but stand there.
So they did so many takes, so many edits. Whereas in Deep Impact, you have the very same effect. Same NASA guy talking about the mission. It's one take. You get all the information down. You don't linger.
Exactly. Michael Bay cuts every scene in Armageddon as if it's an action scene. He even put himself in the movie. He's in it very briefly as a fucking scientist.
You heard it right. Michael Bay, scientist. So he can fall back on that after his career flounders again.
He's in at least 2 shots, for sure. And it is hilarious when you realize that it's him.
So you have these 2 movies about an asteroid and a comet, respectively. Tonally, they're entirely different, but they have a crazy amount in common. And mostly it's due to the fact that they had the same NASA engineer as a consultant on both projects.
Which is fascinating. I had no idea, but it makes sense, right? That you would look to the same type of person, the same kind of qualifications. There's going to be some overlap. It's impossible not to.
And I can only imagine the amount of bullshit that scientist had to hear from either of these Hollywood productions about what actually is going to happen scientifically in a movie.
I think one thing that's hilarious is that Deep Impact has their comet set as the size of New York, which is approximately 7 miles long and the size of Mount Everest is what they said. Whereas Armageddon decided to up the stakes and make it
the size of Texas, which is just hilarious because that's how you describe an asteroid to a president. It's the size of Texas, sir.
It's quite an amazing moment, but it's also just a big fuck you to Deep Impact. It's you know what? You may have started this first, you may have the first release date, but ours is bigger. Our asteroid is so much bigger than yours.
It's huge.
Everything's bigger in Texas.
But besides that, the similarities do not end. Both missions of astronauts involve drilling machines being used on their respective space rocks. And they have to drill to a certain depth, although one uses meters, one uses feet, which is crazy as far as international space science goes.
Real quick, I don't remember. I'm assuming Armageddon uses feet, right?
Oh, they absolutely use feet.
Okay, just making sure that I have
They are
this...
all American. Metric be damned. We also have heavy use of ticking clocks, as you have to know how much time you have left before the end of the world.
Absolutely. In Armageddon, it's specifically a threshold that if they don't explode it before a certain point, it won't wrap around the Earth. And they also have the ticking time bomb of the nuclear weapon itself having a detonation clock. And then in Deep Impact, specifically, it is a countdown to the sun hitting the surface of the comet, which causes some interesting steam and fissures to happen, which I thought was a pretty fun sequence that I didn't even remember.
I know, that's the fun part about going back with these movies. You hardly remember them, and they're full of surprises. We also have some hella inspirational presidential speeches, maybe less so in Armageddon as he's not, super a character. But almost anything that Morgan Freeman says in Deep Impact can rival even the most inspirational of speeches from Independence Day.
I actually disagree with you on this one, Max. I think in Armageddon, although the president isn't a main character, his speech is quite inspirational, whereas most of Morgan Freeman's speeches are really depressing. He's generally telling them throughout the movie, we failed again, the world's about to end.
I think that was probably due to the distinct lack of American flags being flown
oh my God,
in our face.
There are so many American flags in Armageddon. It's insane. There's the whole scene where it's a backdrop where Liv Tyler is just doing a General Patton in front of an American flag. And I think it's all shot separately. I think it's all just second unit pickups with Liv Tyler because they're we need another flag.
And if it isn't the American flags, it's just 1950s America somehow that they shot the month or week or whatever it was shorthand before the premiere of the movie. It's we need more Americana.
Yeah, that's definitely a difference between these two movies. Deep Impact does not have quite the shine on the United States like Armageddon does.
Which makes sense. as far as international cooperation is concerned. Although they both have a quirky Russian involved for the most part.
Yeah, definitely more quirky in Armageddon, but that kind of just fits with the whole vibe of Armageddon, as like he doesn't seem to be quite as qualified or even as intellectual. Like they kind of make him they make him very much an everyman. They don't give him the qualifications
Because he's gone space crazy.
Well, yeah, they kind of go with that, but it's more just like I don't think they want him to be this incredibly intellectual person. I think they
Because he's an actual astronaut. They have to numb him down.
Yeah, and they want him to be like a helpful character. So since all the intellectuals and the elites are like the enemy throughout all of Armageddon, they can't have this character be one of those. Otherwise, they'd have to put him on the opposite side. Whereas in Deep Impact, he is a very qualified Russian astronaut, and he's not quirky. He's the least interesting character on that particular space shuttle.
Besides poor Jon Favreau, who gets flung out into space and goes on to direct the live-action Lion King.
Well, even Jon Favreau, who's hilariously in this movie, has a great scene early on where you establish his character as being a huge nerd. Like, there's at least that. With the Russian guy, you really just don't get anything.
Like,
he's Russian.
He hits things with wrenches and makes them work.
Oh, we're talking about two different movies now. Oh, wait a minute. They're so similar.
With that, we also have similar structures plot-wise, I suppose. They both launch fantastically with great fanfare. They both have post-launch docking in order to advance to the next part of the mission. They both have huge blowouts that cause humanity to lose hope for a minute or so until, they kick it up a notch and they sacrifice at least one crew member to save the world.
Definitely. Like, their structure is very similar. It's just paced incredibly differently. Because the failure in Deep Impact, like I said, happens at like the halfway point, whereas the failure in Armageddon happens like 3/4 of the way through.
Well, mostly because anything in space is almost incidental to what's happening on Earth in Deep Impact. The most interesting characters aren't in space. You have Téa Leoni reporting on everything. She has the most dynamic character arc in the movie. And yeah, that's very strange for a world-ending drama about comets and asteroids and what have you.
It's actually a very good point, is that Armageddon is definitely more hyper-focused on the mission at hand. Almost every character in the movie has something specifically to do with that mission. They're either related to characters that are on that mission or are somehow involved in the actual mission itself. Whereas Deep Impact has 3 separate stories going on, well, even 4 separate stories, really.
Only one of them is in space. The other 3 are on Earth. I mentioned Téa Leoni's arc as an investigative reporter who uncovers the conspiracy to hide this one's a comet coming to Earth. You have young Elijah Wood, who co-discovers the comets and gets it named after him, which is, super flattering. You have the president dealing with all that shit.
Yeah, the end of the world. And then the astronauts trying to solve the problems in space as well. So, like, you have a lot more stories going on, whereas Armageddon's a lot more succinct, a lot tighter in that regard, which I think just makes it more palatable. You follow one story from beginning to end instead of jumping around, which also just takes away a lot of the impact of everything throughout the world. You're only seeing it through one particular storyline.
So overall, you would say that Armageddon wins this particular duel.
I gotta say yes. Like, I have seen Armageddon so many times. Armageddon's a movie that I watch for fun. I watch it with friends for fun. I like to just randomly watch it. Deep Impact is like a movie that I'll put on in the background and fall asleep to.
Yeah, like the score for Armageddon I listen to over and over. It is a great score by Trevor Rabin. And Deep Impact, I almost forget about as soon as I watch it. Like, if I hadn't watched it for this podcast, I probably wouldn't have ever watched it again.
Exactly. It's not memorable. It's good, and there are great elements to it, but it really is almost only referenced in the context of Armageddon.
And in that way, Armageddon, definitely the winner.
And also America. And Aerosmith.
Especially Aerosmith. So we've come to the end of another lovely podcast. As always, he's Joey.
He's Max.
And this has been Twinema Cinema. Thanks for joining us, and catch you next time.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Twinema Cinema.
Please like, share, and subscribe on your favorite podcatching devices.
Also, we want to hear what you think.
What other dueling movies should we look into?
And what did you think of this week's episode?
Let us know. And thanks for stopping by.